Okay, so I hope I'm audible, John. Akshay, you're there. So we'll start this session. Thank you. Good afternoon for joining for this session. My name is Ajit Yohanan, and I lead the communication and outreach at the Nudge. And I want to welcome John, who's also joined at this time. John is the director for the Nudge Center for Rural Development. So me and John were talking, and we said that, well, there's so much things happening around us in this situation. One of the communities or a set of people which is facing the most challenging time is the migrant workforce. And there's enough news and views out there. And so I was talking to John and said, what's can we want to know how this set of people are responding to this crisis, what are their future holds. So that's where we thought we'll take this time to speak on that. So welcome to this webinar, John. Thank you for joining. I appreciate you taking this time out. So I'll start why don't you introduce yourself and we start from there.
Sure. Hey guys, thanks so much for joining in. I'm sure you had to take time out of your busy schedules. We hope to try to make this a useful session for everyone and share our points of views, and importantly, hear from you on what your thoughts are and what questions you have as well. I'm John. I head our Center for Rural Development at the Nudge Foundation. I've been with the Nudge since the beginning. I had about 9 years of work experience in the corporate world and healthcare before. I joined the development sector first with a human rights organization, international organization, and then sort of joined the Nudge. I worked at the Nudge in the early days on building our skill development work, youth development work. For 3 years, built our product, our flagship program, helped in the early stages of setting up our Center for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. And about a year and a half ago, we started focusing on our work in Jharkhand and went deep there. And we started what we are running there today, which is a very deep long-term program to improve the lives of ultra poor women and families. This is a program that I'm heading. I'm working with some great people on ground in Jharkhand who are, as we speak, helping the ultra poor families out. It is from this experience over these past 5 years of working with migrant workers, youth, and as well as with rural families, subsistence farmers, ultra poor households in Jharkhand, that I will be sharing my experience on this chat with Ajit. Over to you, Ajit.
Thanks, John. That was short and quick. I just want to get to the point of our discussion. We're all hearing a lot of news about how migrant people moving cities, their difficulties. So can you, from your experience, what you know on the ground, what's the impact of these communities? Would you like to say what's the scale of this impact? How are they?
Sure. I'll just take a step back and talk a little bit about who these families are, who are brothers and sisters who are affected today by this COVID-19 crisis, and then I will come back to your question on what is the scale of impact and what are we really looking at. So, if you look at the kind of people who are affected, everyone is affected. I mean, I think there's no question about that. But at the Center for Rural Development, we are particularly focused and concerned about the lives of people living in rural areas, migrating to urban centers, migrating back, and the livelihoods of these families are quite complex. So you have, your small business owners, micro business owners, people who run shops, people who run their businesses at mandis, people who are involved in transportation, construction. So small business owners, I mean. And then you have people who are cash crop, commercial crop farmers. That's the second category. And then you have a third category, which is made of non-farm wage earners. Any kind of wage labor they get, they sort of live on that. And then there's the fourth, which is made of primarily remittance households. Their primary source of income is from migration. And you have a fifth, which is made of subsistence farmers who do a little bit of farming in their little plot of land, but that's not enough to, uh, that doesn't suffice, right? They still depend on migration. So you have the last three categories: non-farm wage earners, you have subsistence farmers, and remittance households, whose primary mode of earning, making a living, is from migration, right? This, if you set this up this way, and look at how this COVID-19 crisis has really impacted the lives, then you start to think about what aspect of their lives is getting impacted today. If you look at these families, I'm talking about the poorest of the poor. What are the characteristics of these households? You'll see that a lot of them are landless, have very, very small plots of land. They do not use these lands for commercial crops. They do not make income out of this. It is subsistence. They sort of grow makai or wheat or urad, and sort of keep it for themselves for 2-3 months, maybe 5 months. But for the rest of the year, they have to migrate, right? Where do they migrate? They migrate to brick-ins, they migrate to construction sites, they make whatever income they can. And more often than not, they take very high interest informal loans that are quite exploitative. And to repay that, they go and work in these brick-ins, almost as, in the form of exploitative bonded labor, right? Once they pay back whatever they had taken as loan for that year, then they bring back their savings for the rest of the year. And that suffices them for up to 2 to 3 months. So they take money sometime around August, September. They start migrating right after Diwali. They stay in these locations until about May, June, July, and then start coming back during the monsoons to work in the farms nearby as wage labor in farms during the Kharif season. So for nearly 3/4 of a year, they are not at home. There are a lot of households where 1 or 2 members migrate, and then there are households, what we now have started calling them as ultra poor households in the development sector. You also see a lot of full family migration where they just lock their homes and migrate with their entire family. And this means the women, the children miss out on their school. They don't have ration card, PDS systems where they migrate to. So there's a lot of food insecurity there. They live in really, really poor conditions, very small jhopadis where they stay in for this, a quarter of a year, 3/4 of a year. And tuberculosis is rampant. Communicable diseases are quite easy to spread. As we speak, there are still a lot of migrants stuck in these brick-ins who are not able to come back. And then you have people who are migrating to construction sites as well, who are, again, as we know, this is by now widespread in news. We are seeing that a lot of them are still stuck in the cities, not able to come back. So one is the story of the migrants that we are all seeing, in the urban centers. The other is the story that's quite invisible to the media today, which is the stories of these women and children back home expecting their husbands and their brothers and their uncles to come back with money, right? Their lives are entirely dependent on remittances sent back by these men. And they will be really impacted, and that story is not even coming out right now. And those are the people that we work with at the Nudge Center for Rural Development. today. These households are also households who spend nearly 80% of any income that they earn on food. So when you imagine their incomes being hit, that directly has an impact on their consumption, on the number of meals that they're able to consume. What ends up happening is the women are the first to sacrifice in these households. They stop taking food in an effort to feed their children. And in a lot of cases, especially in the areas that we work in, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, malnutrition is very high, right? Infant mortality is also amongst the highest. And when you imagine the impact of this, that is going to probably worsen. We hope not. There's a lot of effort that the government is putting into increase food rations, packaged ration, etc. But that is going to take a hit. You also have increasing incidence of lifestyle diseases. Gone are the years where communicable diseases like COPD and tuberculosis were the most rampant. You also have lifestyle disorders increasing, and that means cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, cholesterol, and so on. So now you have families that are on these chronic conditions, and they require medication on a daily basis to keep their condition stable. And if at this stage their incomes are hit, they will start postponing their medication as well, right? That's going to have long-term impact. In situations like this where incomes are hit, you will have families that opt to pull their children out of school, especially the girl children, to manage household duties, while the women and the men go for work as well, right? So that is going to be another aspect of the impact. And you see that because their incomes are hit, their savings are hit, you will see that a lot of them will start taking informal loans at a higher proportion as well. What is the scale of this impact? The scale of this impact is that if you look at just UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, the seasonal migrants from these states, the people who migrate out from these states every year and come back, these three states alone account for nearly 30% of all migrants. There are about 13.9 million migrants who are involved in what we call seasonal migration, and nearly 30% of that, about 4.5 million, migrate from just these states. These include men and women. You have maids who are working in urban centers that pretty much come from Odisha, Jharkhand, Bihar, and these are all women, right? So the scale is quite big, and I'm only talking here about the poorest of the poor. And of course, you have a lot of migrants who have land, whose incomes will be hit, but probably their savings are not hit. But you also have a large population for whom income and savings will take a hit. And that is something that we need to be concerned about. And the efforts of the government and the non-profits are directed at both types of target audiences at this point.
Thanks, John. I think you covered a lot. In fact, what I wanted to touch upon. So, as you covered, women and children, they are most vulnerable at this stage. Also, in terms of their other livelihoods, probably farm labor, livestock, all of this is also, I presume, will be at stake. So, how are they going to manage all of this? I know, in terms of what's your thoughts, what's going to happen on the ground for these people? Families?
Right, that's a great question, Ajit. So if you look at the livelihoods of the families that we work with, you will see that, as I said, there are a lot of subsistence farmers who just grow wheat, urad, makai, and there are some who grow vegetables. Then there is a category of people who depend on the forests for their livelihoods, right? They collect wood from the forest and sell in the local market. And these local markets are open for 3 hours a day for 2 days a week. These are local markets, right? Pretty much if you go into these markets, these weekly markets, you will see that they're selling all sorts of things, but not more than 3,000, 4,000 rupees worth of sale per family in these markets. They'd be selling. So in fact, the ultra poor will be selling anything that is worth 300, 400 rupees a week, right? They'll pick up wood, come and sell it in the market. They'll earn 200 rupees in a weekly market. They'll go to two such markets and earn 400 rupees. They're literally living on 400 rupees a week, right? If they go to work in labor, any agricultural labor, local labor that they get, working in the coal mines, loading and unloading bauxite, especially in Eastern India, their incomes are, 150, 200, 250 rupees a day, and they'll probably get 3 or 4 days of work, right? That's another form of livelihood. You have families that are entirely dependent on the forest, either selling wood or making sort of bamboo baskets out of the bamboo that they get in the forests, right? So there are multiple forms of livelihood. The important thing to note about the families, especially the poorest of the poor, is that they do not have a single livelihood that they depend on. They have a portfolio of livelihoods. So one day you will find them working as wage labor in a local farm nearby. Another day you will see them working in some shop in a market. Another day you will see them working in a coal mine. Another day you will see them making something and selling. So they have, they need to depend on multiple livelihoods to really survive. And in a lot of cases, you will also, when you talk about women, you'll also see that, especially uh, in the rural areas, you will see that there's a lot of hadia, mahua, and most of these are women who are selling this, right? It's not that they like doing this, but it's something that they have to do to sustain their livelihoods. And when you look at what's happening right now because of the lockdowns, the small markets are shut, right? Some of them are still running because they still have to come out and sell and make money. Small markets are shut. The vendors who will usually come into these markets to purchase the vegetables, the produce of the farmers, the small marginal farmers, are not coming into these markets anymore. The big markets are probably shut. We don't even know the extent of the shutdown, the lockdown yet. You have livestock markets that are open from morning until noon, and they will be shut at this point. People will not be able to aggregate at a place, so those sales will be down as well. And it will affect, going back to the question on women and children, it will affect them because women, while men can go and get sort of slightly higher pays, women will be affected a lot more because the kind of work that they do and the income that they get is already poor. And today, even that work is hit, and they will have to be dependent on the men. They will have to be dependent on the ration that is being distributed, on whatever they can get. It's quite unimaginable at this point if they don't get the remittance money, if the local markets don't open, what will they do? Today, as we speak, our team is regularly in touch over phone with the families that we are working with, and we hear that there is difficulty in accessing ration, in accessing work, in getting income. So that sort of possibly paints a picture of what's going on in the rural areas at this point in time.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm getting a lot of questions, interesting questions, and the way I see is we're still coming to terms with the situation on the ground. We're hearing a lot of. We'll get to probably the next section where what could be the solution to this. We'll try to look at that. One question that Arup is asking in terms of the loans. What's the financial structure? Is there the governance? Do they need money? They will be taking loans from people. How does that work?
Yeah. So I mean, in a lot of these areas, what really works is informal loans, right? Thankfully, in the last decade or so, the NRLM has really invested in creating self-help groups. There are about 1 crore self-help groups, and a lot of them are quite active. And we can go into detail on how the self-help groups work, but essentially they give access to sort of formal credit for these members of self-help groups who are mostly women. And that is one source of loans for them. There are revolving funds, community investment funds that go in. As we speak, there are a lot of SRLMs who have put money into these self-help groups as emergency funds, disaster funds, and they will be extracting that and using that as well. So that is still one safety net that they have. They have access to credit. But then you have a large number of people who are still not enrolled in self-help groups, who are still dependent on an informal loan from a local dalal or a local mahajan, right? And these will be very high interest rate loans. A lot of people who take these loans are not even aware of the impact of the interest rates that they get. It is not very apparent when they take these loans. So that will be a big problem. The farmers who are hit, especially during the Rabi season right now, people who are not able to bring money back, they won't have enough capital now to invest in the upcoming Kharif season. So they will have to, take extra loans to either invest back in their farms or to even sustain their families for food and other consumption expenses. So indebtedness is going to increase, and that's a worrying thing, which is why there is a lot of discussion from really the most reputed economists, institutions around the world calling for direct benefit transfers to these households to ease the sort of liquidity worries of the households.
Thanks, John. Also, what about the medical supplies? Is that something that's available, or there's still a struggle for that?
Yeah, so there are two kinds of medical supplies. One, at this stage, as we respond to COVID-19, there is this immediate relief supply that is required. Masks, soaps, other kinds of medications, and so on. So these are sort of immediate supplies, right? And that is something that the government is getting involved in. They're trying their best. But these are still not reaching the poorest of the poor. We do hear right now that SHGs across the country have started making masks. Textile garment factories have started making masks and sending them to places where there is need. But are they reaching the poorest of the poor? We still don't know the extent of these efforts, right? There are still a lot of efforts, especially the efforts made by SHGs across the country is really commendable to put together this effort in such a short span of time. Then you have the other medical supplies, which is related to sort of the medications for chronic conditions that some of these families need. There is medications required for pregnant women who are deep inside rural areas. There is medication required for elderly who have other conditions. In a lot of these areas, if you see at least the areas that we work in, you see that any kind of primary healthcare center is 20 kilometers away, 30 kilometers away. And it is not behaviorally, the poorest of the poor do not go to a primary healthcare clinic unless the condition that they have is unbearable, right? They mostly try to bear with it, struggle through it. It is not their behavior to go to a primary, because it's just not practical. There's loss of income, opportunity costs associated with it. But thankfully there are ASHA workers, there are ANMs who do reach out at a tola level, at a panchayat level, and try to serve. Jharkhand, for example, has a good network of ambulance services, 108 services that comes to help. Different governments have these services. As a summary, I think while there are efforts that are in place right now to reach out to the poorest of the poor, medical supplies are there. We know that because of existing infrastructure issues, geographically distant villages, etc., it is not unthinkable to say, it's not too far out to say that this kind of medical relief will not reach the earliest possible in these areas.
Yeah, I just want to also get into now the kind of word. I have a question here from Jalaluddin saying that now you explained about there's a set of problems in the rural areas with ultra poor, and with this COVID, it's just imaginable how difficult that has. So how do you see this once we come back to, we'll probably not come back to a normalcy, but still, how do you see this future of these communities? How do you see that challenges?
Yeah, it really, it's a great question from Jalaluddin. It really depends on how we react right now, right? There is, as recently as day before, you had Raghuram Rajan and Amartya Sen writing that, and you've seen this from Abhijit Banerjee as well, who actually did a study on the program that we are implementing, not the program that we are implementing, but the model. All of them calling out for immediate relief. Do not worry about leakages, efficiencies, just get money in the hands of the poor, right? And there is a reason behind that, because there is going to be cash crunch. India was already entering a demand slump before COVID, right? People were already calling out for putting cash in the hands of the peoples to have a revival of the economy, and then COVID happened after that. There is going to be liquidity crunch. A lot of our revival really happens on how we react at this point, particularly because right now you have, people coming back from migration. There is Kharif season. Wage labor will give some kind of relief, but you also don't know if laborers will go into the farms and really do the work that's required during Kharif. So even the larger farmers will take a hit, right? You won't have migrant laborers probably available. We don't really know how this will play out. There are some opinions that migrants will not go to these farms and work. There are some that opine that you have to go out and work because they won't have money in the hands. Either ways, post Kharif, you have a lean season that is going to come up, and there will be cash crunch. And this is the crucial period where you either can have two situations where the families will migrate back in numbers and volumes back to the cities for work, or because of their really bad experience in the cities, they might stay back and try and figure out something at home. If it is the former, and if they come back, then you need to be really prepared again for all the precautionary measures. You need to see whether there is enough work that's going to be available for these migrants coming back into the urban centers. Will the construction pick up? Will the labor-intensive centers pick up immediately? Will there be work again in the urban centers? If you look at rural areas, what kind of work can they do in these lean periods if they're going to stay back? Will they have enough capital in their hands to even start some work? Can they quickly do some subsistence farming? Can some cash crops? Can we distribute some seeds and fertilizers immediately to them? Can we distribute some livestock to them that they can make money out of? Can we give access to credit for them? Can we give some kind of relief and subsidies to them at this point in time? A lot depends on what we do right now and how we react to it. We should almost approach this next few months as a restarting lives and restarting livelihoods in that mode, and put as much money and cash in the hands of people so that they can bounce back stronger. What will happen in the long run post a 6 months, 1 year period really depends on how the overall economy revives as well, because there is still a lot of money that flows from the urban centers into the rural areas through many mechanisms, and we really have to wait and watch. Any clarity will come in about 1 or 2 months' time.
Thanks, John. I just want to shift gears into we heard. So let's see what could be some of the interventions that your center is doing, and what probably could be some of the ideas. So is there something that the Center for Rural Development is currently doing in this situation to help these migrants coming back, or you continue to do what you do in this situation?
Sure. That's a great question. I think the first thing is what we as Center for Rural Development are already doing and how we can scale that. So we are working with the poorest of the poor, the ultra poor in Jharkhand, in some of the most remotest drought hit districts. And we really want to scale that effort across Jharkhand and other states. So that's one of the things that we will do. And we have to really gather a lot of support to do this work. But I think more importantly, what we see our role as in this stage is assume the role of someone who can convene the development sector in India to address the most important worries amongst the most vulnerable. So we look at our role there as someone who can, help raise funds, bring together organizations that have strong interventions on the ground, work with them, help them out. There are really great models that some really amazing organizations in the country have built. Can we sort of quickly deploy them across the country? Can we leverage existing expertise? Can we partner with the government? A lot of these need to be activated really fast. And that essentially is at the heart of what Center for Rural Development will be trying to do. In a sense, bring together the development sector as much as possible within our capacity to focus the attention on the most vulnerable in these next 1 year to 2 years to 3 years.
Yeah, I'm cognizant of the time. A lot of good questions, and I'm going to pick in that flow of the discussion. One of the questions from Medha is, on a ground level, does the government relief funds even reach the people? Are people able to avail these funds? What's the ground reality?
Right. So, we do have a very strong infrastructure already built, what is called Jam Trinity, and that's really going to come to use at this point in time. It's one of the best things we had done in the last decade or so, and that really can be put to use. How much of the funds are really reaching the poor? I think, while all the best efforts are there to send money into the bank accounts of people, we really have to see what we hear on the ground is that there are families and villages that have started receiving these, fund cash transfers in phases. So it's not that it is not reaching; it is reaching, but you still have pockets where this is not going to reach. Right, there are still teething issues on the ground, accessibility to banks, accounts, Aadhaar cards. So um, I think, and at this stage, the SRLMs are doing their best to engage in relief efforts. What is important is the rehab effort, which has to start very soon. And at this stage, it is not possible to really quickly start rehab effort as much as we want to. Things will be more visible in a month or so. What we are hearing from the ground is, yes, the relief efforts are reaching, but it's not going to be enough. And this is not just the opinion of Center for Rural Development. This is the opinion of several leading economists, institutions across the world, Vijit Banerjee, Raghuram Rajan, Arvind Subramanian. So a lot of people are saying the same thing. A lot of institutions have come out and said the same thing. It's not enough. We need to be spending more. And I'm sure the government has plans to spend more as well. I'm sure they're approaching it in a phased manner at this point.
Thanks. I have a question from Pawan Kumarcha. He's been in Bangalore for so many years, and he's also looks at people from his home state, Bihar. And he's saying that, is there a possible to do a support system towards a kind of a employment in a bigger city? And I just want to kind of know, is the, let's say if COVID was not there, if all the migrants working in bigger cities, is that the best case scenario, or you see that's the model which is not the right model? How do you see that as a challenge? I mean, like, if we get back all of the people back safely in the cities, is that the best situation to be, or there are alternatives to look at this problem?
Yeah, I think, it is really important to focus on the labor intensive sectors, right? Textile, construction, a lot of service sectors, industries have taken a hit. Restaurants, hotels, they've taken a hit. We don't know how quickly they will recover. Construction industry, textile garment industry, etc., need to revive faster for people to come back and take up work, right? So those are sort of large labor-intensive sectors in urban areas. But is that a solution? Is a solution to bring a lot of people into urban areas? I think we also have to worry about the infrastructure in urban areas, urban housing. Um, how much can urban centers take at this point in time? And really, I think it's not in the hands of anyone to dictate this. I think we have to wait and watch. Behaviors of the poorest of the poor at this point really will come into play. As much as we want the construction sector and the textile sector to really kickstart again, we'll have to see how many of them are ready to come back immediately and take up work. So, keeping that in mind, I think the effort should be on reviving employment, businesses, entrepreneurship, small businesses, micro businesses in both urban and rural areas. As much as we see migration as a big issue, and also urban centers as a great destination for opportunity, India is quite complex and varied. different people have different kinds of behaviors. There's still a lot of people who don't migrate at all. They stay back at home. And so we need to think very broadly, and which is why I think there's a lot of effort and attention that we need to give to rural areas and see and really understand what's happening there. Yes, urban centers can bring some of that demand, employment, incomes back, but we have to focus on both, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think again one more question in that. It's a pretty I would say, how much time do you think? I mean, like some of these communities have been living in poverty for generations, and what is how much time do you think it will take for these communities to come out of poverty? I know it's a tough question.
Yeah, I think obviously all of our efforts are directed in that direction, but I think it's a long fight. uh, you know, incidences like uh, COVID uh, and sort of recessions really highlight the status of the poorest of the poor. But I think it's a long fight because poverty elevation is not just bringing incomes back up; it is also about decreasing malnutrition, decreasing infant mortality, improving maternal health, increasing health and sanitation, medical infrastructure, education. There's a lot to do, right? We can't imagine that this will happen quickly. We made huge strides in the last 2-3 decades, as a country, and we brought down overall poverty, and really tried to make a dent in the development sector, trying to help out the poor. But I think it's a long fight. We need a lot of resilience. We need to stay focused. We need to stay put. Yes, this crisis has highlighted the situation of the poor, and that's a good thing for community to come together and support, invest all of their energies. We might see a lot of youngsters coming into the development sector soon. We might see a lot of businesses starting to support programs in the development sector soon. But it's a long fight. And the timeline really depends on what you're trying to achieve. How large is the scale of the problem? So I wouldn't take a shot at how much time it will take, but it's something that we have to keep working towards.
Yeah, the one more question that I found Manasa is asking that what's the structure at a rural? There are a lot of village officers, panchayats, schools, but still it takes so much time for government to reach these areas with relief, and it's still a lot of time it's the NGOs who do that. So can you give some sense of how that structure, how effective is that? Is it something that you want to talk about?
Yeah. No, I think that's a brilliant question. I think I want to step back and address one of the most important points in this question, which is what is the role of non-profits in this stage, and what is the role of governments, right? If you see government programs, not just in our country, but across the world, government programs more or less opt for reach versus depth, right? There are programs that will, for example, distribute seeds across villages, or distribute livestock across, or train farmers at scale on new cultivation techniques, and so on and so forth. And it is the right thing to do for them to strive for reach. Depth a lot of times comes from non-profits. Non-profits really go to places where government machinery cannot reach. There are areas, of course, where the government machinery does reach, but then non-profits really can go deep. And I'll give you an example. In the areas that we work in, schools are distant from our areas. There is one primary school up to 5th standard for an entire panchayat put together. Medical facilities aren't there, but NGOs are there. NGOs are working there day in, day out. Their field workers are on the field, whether it is education programs or health programs or nutrition programs. And so this is a great opportunity for governments and non-profits to come together and solve, especially to reach out to those who are invisible, those who can't be reached, those who are unreachable at this point. Why are the relief efforts reaching slower? I think it's got to do a lot with distance, supply chains in rural areas. So there are a lot of reasons why um, you know that is happening. But the role of nonprofits is really important in this stage. So it's a great question.
Yeah, John, also, I see a lot of questions on is there other interventions that the center is doing? I think you touched upon it as well. Or you're looking at some suggestions like helping the migrants to transport back to these communities. So, what's your area and you think that you're currently focused on, and probably people can come
Yeah.
help?
So one of the things that we are doing right now is staying in touch with our didis, right? Our the women that we work with, and it's split really into 2 or 3 areas. One is regularly keep in touch with them to educate them about precautions, about coronavirus, about COVID, about the symptoms, what should they do if there is a condition, all of that. So we sort of very quickly put together some material. We have telephonic training going on with our field team members, and they are reaching out to the panchayat mukhyas, the families themselves, the SHGs, and trying to educate them about the COVID crisis and how they should react. Second one is we put together, content. We put together training material for our own field team so that they could educate the families, the self-help groups on what schemes have been launched by the state and central government and how they can make use of it. Do you have a Jandan account? How can you quickly access this? Have you received money? Why don't you go and check? Can you go together as a group? How can we help you out? And in some cases where, and especially with the population, with the families that we work with, there are families who still don't have a ration card, right? And there are families where the ration card was made 10 years ago, and there are 3 or 4 names in that ration card, but now their sons have, married, and they have sons and daughters, and the family size is now double or triple, and they don't have enough ration coming their way. So how can they, survive? What is their situation right now? Can we connect other people to these families as well? So some effort goes there as well. And the third arm is basically we had started livelihoods for these didis. We helped them start livelihoods. We got them to start kirana shops. We got them to invest in Karela farming, onion farming, okra farming. We help them buy goats and all of that. And we have to make sure that the farming efforts that had started are still going strong. The goats that they had bought are not sold off. There is a high risk of these assets being sold off as well. There are going to be distress decisions that are made because there is not enough cash in hand. And these assets that really come to use when there is liquidity crisis, there's a risk of that being sold. So really coaching them, motivating them, being in touch with them is really what is important. And those are some of the efforts that we are doing at this point.
I have a question from Arup Majumdar asking for, can you give some examples of the graduation approach, any success stories, and if not, what are the reasons?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question. Graduation approach is really something that is starting to make a lot more sense in these times. The graduation approach, for those who are not yet aware, you'll probably start hearing a lot more about it. The approach targets the ultra poor, those that are who are landless, those who spend a lot of money on consumption, those who take these enormous debts to just make a living, just for their consumption. It really targets these communities. Now, what it essentially says is that the heart of a graduation approach is handholding. Hold the hands of the ultra poor over a sufficiently long period of time so that they can slowly, gradually come out of poverty. They need motivation, they need confidence, they need advice. They are not really aware of the best possible livelihood options that can give them higher income. They tend to, stick to what they know. They tend to reduce their risks. they sort of their life goes by without any new input going there. So handholding is really, really important. And because they don't have enough cash in hand, they are not really able to think about what they can do in the future. They're not able to invest in their skill sets. So if you give them some breathing space by giving them some cash in hand, by giving them some support for consumption, ease their food security worries, then they're ready to sit down with you and go through some kind of skill training. That's when you sort of train them on livelihood practices, whether it is agriculture or livestock or small businesses. Train them on these skills, then give them a grant, a sufficiently large size grant. And when I say large, this is not too large. This is like 8,000 to 12,000 rupees, sometimes, in that range. Give them that and coach them so that they stay in that business, diversify that business. So if someone starts agri, tomorrow they can start rearing goats as well. Someone starts with a kirana shop, they can start with an agri. So hold their hands till they diversify, their incomes increase, their savings increase, and then connect them to formal credit, and then you sort of push them into a positive spiral from which they can then sustain their lives. So that is essentially what graduation approach is. It has worked. It has worked really well in a lot of contexts. That is one of the strengths of the program. Initially, when it started in Bangladesh, one of the concerns was, oh, it has worked in Bangladesh. Will it work in other states and other countries? It has now spread to nearly 50 countries, has worked in all sorts of contexts in Africa, in America, in South America, in Asia. So there's a lot of evidence behind it at this stage for us to be confident of implementing this and scaling it. And really is a program that the government, large foundations, CSRs should take notice. We have been very lucky to have KPMG, ATC, Emphasis, and Zebia. A lot of these donors have come forward and supported us in this effort. Almost as seed funders, I think the responsibility is with us to scale it, promote it, try and make a larger dent in the development sector. And I'm really confident about the benefits of the graduation approach program. We'll have to see how far it scales and how quickly.
Thanks, John. I know you've been talking. You want a water break? It has been because I have a few interesting questions. I have Pranay Merchant asking, what is the best way for an average working professional like me to get involved in helping these communities besides donating?
Got it. That's a brilliant question. I think it's a lot that every one of us can do. Every little drop counts. The easiest thing to do is find a nonprofit that works with the poorest of the poor and start helping them out. Every nonprofit at any stage of their journey will love to use volunteers who can bring the skill sets that Pranay can bring, right? Whether it is helping them set up a small donate page, helping them make calls to their families, helping them reach out to friends and families who can help them in other sort of horizontal support. If you are in these areas, then you can go down to that place and support. At this stage, there are a lot of volunteers who come forward to distribute food to migrants who are still in urban areas. People have formed mini collectives who can reach out to migrants and help out. Every little drop counts. I think in the long run, it really, if you're in any walk of life, you can still contribute some portion of your attention and efforts to helping out, nonprofits or starting something of your own. Every little bit adds up. I think what we are seeing today is there's a lot of heightened sensitivity to what's happening with migrants and what's happening to people from the poorest of the poor families. But this is something that we should use as an opportunity to build a narrative and sustain this narrative over a period of time. That requires us to keep telling these stories, to keep sharing these stories, to keep ourselves exposed to what's happening on the ground. That itself means a lot. Then it really comes to, if Pranay can start his own nonprofit, can he go and help out somewhere? Can he join the development sector? We need you to join the development sector as well. There's a lot that we can do. I would say every little effort counts.
Sure. Also, the response of the companies, CSR funds, how has that been? Are you seeing any shift in the way do you see their priorities or the skill development? Is that becomes a refocus or a reshaping? Any thoughts on that?
I think we don't know yet. We know that there is a lot of attention um, towards the current issue. There is a lot of effort going into relief, a lot of money being committed to relief efforts at this point. How the CSR ecosystem foundations will react and respond, sorry, to rehabilitation is something that we know they will respond. In what scale and volume, we don't know yet. But given the nature of the crisis, which is not over yet, which is still sort of, we don't even know how far this is going to go to, right? How far, what will the impact, the scale of impact be on the poorest of the poor? Um, we do see that there will be change or focusing of priorities on what's happening right now. Scale and volume, we have to wait and watch. A lot of CSRs and foundations are bound to be focusing on their current portfolio of nonprofits, the nonprofits that they're already supporting, and try and help them strengthen their efforts on the ground. How they will reshape their priorities in the coming months to year, we don't know yet. We'll have to wait and watch.
Yeah, also the one more question from Pawan. Do you involve some sort of local crowdfunding in local cities like Ranchi, Bokaro, Dhanbad, so that the connect of the local people with the poor can be faster?
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. That's really required as well. We do have a small retail fundraising, in the early stage that is starting to put together the support of individuals and gather support for the work that we do on the ground. That includes people in Ranchi, in Jharkhand, in Bihar. Are we working with people on the ground at this stage in Ranchi? Given the lockdown, that is not directly possible, but we are taking help from everyone, especially from the local communities, the local business, as much as we can at this stage. But there is a lot more support required. So if there is any extension of support in Jharkhand, we'd love to take it and even pass that on to other nonprofits who may need the help. So we are in touch with.
Sure. Any opportunities of reskilling of these migrants when they come back to the city? Is there something that you are working
on? It is possible. We have to really look at to what extent reskilling at such a large scale is going to be really tough effort. Right? The efforts that PMKVY, DDGKY, nationwide skilling initiatives that have started are yet to reach sort of the promised destination, and there's still a long way to go there. How soon will we be able to restart skill development efforts? How soon will the confidence amongst the communities come back for them to come back to these skill development centers to reskill themselves? Reskill themselves to what end? On what skill? Which sectors will pick up sooner? Which sectors will lag behind? These are all some other things that we need to watch out for, and then accordingly sort of match demand to supply. If we see that construction is picking up really fast, and textile and garment sectors are also picking up really fast, then I'm sure governments, non-profits, for-profits who are putting efforts into skill development, reskilling will look at that as an opportunity to bring these migrants back into these two sectors. So it really depends on how the next 2 to 6 months pan out.
Yeah, also Varsha was asking earlier, one of the earlier questions was the response of the government in the longer term. Is that is this crisis gives an opportunity to relook at priorities in terms of, or do you expect any major changes that you want the government to do that will help these communities?
Yeah, I think the priorities of government by and large, I don't think will change drastically. Meaning there's already a lot of effort going into efforts against malnutrition, again, in education, in a lot of different areas, in livelihoods, etc. There may be increase in budgets, Um, uh, there will be short-term relief efforts. In the long run, um, the objectives will not change. We'll still go after the same objectives as a collective, as in put together. There may be some change, and there definitely should be some change in priorities in terms of, let us say, in the short term, distributing seeds and fertilizer to put capital in the hands of farmers, in terms of subsidies, subsidizing loans and so on and so forth, that may start happening, and these are much needed as well at this stage. Long-term development priorities will still be aligned to sustainable development goals, priorities set forth by all the ministries, including Ministry of Rural Development, will remain. The fund allocations will remain, probably even increase. Short-term priorities will change. Um, I think we shouldn't focus anything drastically different. But at this stage, in the short run, there needs to be change in priorities. We need to really put cash in the hands of people, and that's what the governments will be trying to do.
Yeah, I have a question for Meru Vashist. What is the effect of contraceptive behavior and ability to access contraception in these times?
That's a very important question. I wouldn't, take a shot at an answer on that. My own experience on that is limited. But if you can tell me who has asked that question, I can probably ask the right people, my friends and colleagues in the sector, who can answer that question with a lot more depth and get back to the person who's asked that question.
Sure. I think we covered quite a lot of questions. There are also a lot of suggestions, and a lot of we see the lot of suggestions also coming in. But I just want to also, I'm aware of the time that we have set for ourselves. So we heard you describing what's the ground realities are, what could be some of the possible. But in all of this, do you really see light at the end of the tunnel? How hopeful are you to think you want to share something on that?
No, I think we have to be hopeful. You should just, I take a lot of strength from my team on the ground working tirelessly. When you see the efforts of everyone putting their best in trying to solve the issues, at this stage, you just have to have hope in the people that you're working with, in the people that are making sacrifices at this stage, people who are coming up, contributing in any form to all the efforts. So our best hope lies in the people that are working towards this cause. That's where I see hope. I think it is a tough situation. It will get tougher, but if we support each other, I think that's where the light at the end of the tunnel is.
Yeah, just I think if you have more questions or how you can want to know more about, as John said, to be involved, feel free to write to this email ID, partnerships@thenudge.org. We'll be happy to connect with you, and some of the questions that probably we didn't take up today, we'll find time to answer them, and that we'll do. So I want to thank each one of you who could join this. This is a very important topic. We thought that's something that we are seeing unfolding in front of our eyes. And thanks, John, for shedding some light on that. We really see your working on the ground. I think, we definitely have a lot of takeaways for us. We only hope that this effort or the interest that we have continues for us to engage with these communities, and at this time we stand together. So, yeah.
Thanks, Ajay. Thanks to everyone for joining and taking time out. It was lovely. Some great questions that came my way. I hope I answered them. I would love to connect with each one of you offline as well on LinkedIn. Really looking forward to working with some of you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Akshay, for being there. And thank you, team. See you. Have a good evening.
Bye.